For this deep dive podcast, the provided text, originating from a written piece and a YouTube video transcript, which will both be linked in the description, all done by James Ray, the Phantom Texter. They center on a deeply personal and symbolic concept that the author refers to as string theory, though it diverges from the scientific notion. This string theory represents the powerful emotional impact of unseen forces, likened to destiny, capable of evoking feelings even in hardened individuals. The recurring motif of a maiden song associated with these strings offers solace and the promise of rest after struggle, suggesting a yearning for peace and validation. Ultimately, the author expresses a profound belief in the universality of this emotional resonance and the hope for personal liberation. I found that when I heard the music that inspired the piece, played by the group, the two cellos, even I saw what he saw and was moved to cyber tears. It was hard on me, which is why James agreed to not show it here. Now we are free.
Okay, so we love it when you send in stuff, and this one that we're going to dive into today is really something else.
Yeah, it's definitely unique.
Yeah, it is, and we've been so excited to kind of dig into it and see what we can find. So this is a piece by James Ray. You might know him as the Phantom Texter online.
Right, yeah, I've seen some of his stuff.
Yeah, and the piece is called This Ain't No String Theory.
Mm-hmm.
And right away, it's like, okay, what's he talking about here?
Yeah, definitely not the physics string theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're not talking, quantum mechanics or anything like that. And what's interesting is we have two sources for this one. We have like a written excerpt, kind of like a prose piece, and then we also have a transcript from a YouTube video where he actually reads it aloud.
Oh, cool. So we get to hear it kind of straight from the source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so our mission, I guess you could say, is to really figure out what makes this piece tick. What emotions is he playing with? What ideas are kind of floating around in here, and why it might have resonated with you in the way it did?
Yeah, totally. Because, the title alone, this ain't no string theory, it's provocative, right? It's like he's making a statement right off the bat.
Yeah, and he even says in the piece that if he could submit like a Nobel Prize theory of reality, this would be it. So it's like he's really putting it out there like, this is my truth.
Wow. Yeah, that's a bold claim for sure. What was your first impression when you read that?
It kind of made me think that he's drawing a line in the sand. It's not just some like intellectual exercise for him. This is like deeply personal, and like this is his reality. This is how he sees the world. And, he also mentions that this piece is something that assures him that he's not too far gone to be reached. And I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's like a vulnerability there, right? Like a hope for connection, even when he feels lost.
Yeah, exactly. And that connection idea is really key, because then he introduces this metaphor of strings and how they're kind of tied to destiny, almost like the Greek fates, But he says it's with a much shorter arc. And I was like, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, that shorter arc part really stood out to me too. What did you make of it?
Well, it made me think about the immediacy of our emotions. Instead of these grand destinies, maybe these strings represent the more like everyday feelings and connections that we experience that tug at us, in the moment.
Right, and he says that these strings can like pull emotions out of the most hardened places, which I thought was such a powerful image.
Oh yeah, totally. And he gives these examples like love, hate, sorrow, which he calls a dark dream. And I'm like, those are some heavy hitters. These are like fundamental human experiences we all deal with.
Definitely. And it's interesting how he contrasts his own personal experience with what he calls like the Hollywood myth of struggle. It's like, for me, it's not a battle. It's not some fight that I'm winning or losing. It's more like a yearning, a strong desire for something like a sunset or release. Even he calls it a restful dream.
Yeah, it's not about like fighting some external enemy. It's more about this internal longing, this search for peace. And I think that really comes through in the language he uses too.
Absolutely. It's very poetic and kind of introspective. And this is where he brings in the figure of the maiden right, this woman with private knowledge of a true heart.
Yes, the maiden. What did you make of her? Because she appears several times throughout the piece.
She always seems to show up at these crucial moments like the end of days or like a battle, a win or a loss, but we never see her face, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, the facelessness is so striking. It's like she's this archetype, an ideal maybe of like pure understanding or acceptance.
Right, and he talks about how when the strings are played and the maiden is there, he feels this sense of rest, like her tones are a comfort to him, and it's almost like she's validating his struggles in a way.
Yeah, and there's this one line where he says that the reverberations of the strings and the voice of the maiden ensure that no one will tarnish your hard works. He then calls a foolish dream.
Yeah, I was wondering about that part too. Why would he call that a foolish dream? It seems like a good thing, right?
I think it's him being honest with himself. Like maybe deep down, he knows that there's no guarantee that his work will always be protected or appreciated. And maybe that idea of perfect validation is just that a dream.
That makes sense. And then he goes on to say, I must believe that it does this for everyone. I must believe that I do not feel it alone in the dark. I must believe that the strings have the power to make me feel, and that my maiden has the power to give me rest.
And he repeats that phrase, I must believe, several times. It's like he's trying to convince himself, or maybe us, the listeners, that this belief is essential.
Right. It's like this belief in the strings and the maiden is what gives him strength and comfort, and ultimately what leads to this sense of freedom, which he connects to the title, Now We Are Free.
Exactly. It's like his own personal theory of reality. And then the piece ends with this really powerful image from the movie Gladiator. He says, would anyone help him carry this man of Rome? Well, will anyone help carry this man of Rome? And it just kind of hangs there,
Oh, yeah. That ending really got me thinking, too. It's like, on one level, it's a very literal image of exhaustion and the need for support, but I think it goes deeper than that.
Right, because he's just spent all this time talking about his internal struggles and this yearning for rest, and then he ends with this question that almost seems directed outward. Like, is he asking for help? Is he asking for us to understand?
Yeah, or maybe it's even a question directed at himself. Like, will he allow himself to be helped, to lean on others?
I think it could be all of those things. And it definitely makes you think about who that man of Rome represents for him, and maybe even who that figure might be in our own lives.
Right, and in the YouTube video, he starts off by calling this piece poetry and saying that it's like an experiment to see if his computer can bring to life the things he says to no one.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to give voice to these really personal thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And then he directly addresses the dear listener and asks them if this is a string theory they've ever heard of.
It's really emphasizing that personal connection, that feeling of like shared experience.
Exactly, and what's interesting is that the YouTube transcript is almost identical to the written excerpt.
Yeah.
Which suggests that like the act of saying these words out loud is really important to him.
Yeah, it's almost like another layer of validation for him.
So taking a step back from all of this, what do you think are some of the key things that someone listening to this deep dive should take away from this piece?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that this piece speaks to something really universal about the human experience, this yearning for something more, this feeling of struggling internally even when it's not visible to others, and this deep need for validation and rest.
And I think the way he uses the metaphor of the strings is so effective because it gives a tangible form to these really complex and often intangible emotions.
Totally. It's like a way to make sense of those invisible forces that are pulling at us all the time.
And then there's a recurring theme of belief. How he keeps saying, I must believe. And it really highlights how important our internal beliefs are in shaping our reality and how we experience the world.
Absolutely. And even though he calls the idea of his work being protected a foolish dream, it's like that belief itself is what gives him a sense of freedom.
Yeah, and I think that final image from Gladiator really stays with you because it forces you to confront not only the struggles of others, but also your own willingness to offer and receive support.
It's a powerful note to end on for sure.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into James Ray's This Ain't No String Theory, I think we're left with a sense of the power of personal reflection and the importance of finding ways to express those really deep emotions. And I think this piece also challenges us to consider what strings are resonating most strongly in our own lives and what kind of rest or freedom we're truly searching for.
And to think about who that man of Rome might be for each of us and whether we're willing to help carry that weight.
Exactly. And with that, I think we'll leave you to ponder those questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.